Hey everyone, I'm Jimmy Johnson from ChainSafe. A little bit about me. Like I said, I'm working at ChainSafe. I work on the Gossamer team, which is our Golang implementation of the Polkadot host. And yeah, thanks for coming to my talk. Today, I'm going to be giving a walk through the dark forest. And for those that don't get to the reference, I'm going to be talking about MEV and hopefully giving a nice introduction to what that is, the different forms it takes, why it's a serious problem, and why we should care, and why solutions are hard to begin with. So yeah, let's join me in this little tour of the dark forest, shall we? Let's go. Okay, so to start out, what is MEV? It stands for Maximum Extractable Value, and I can hear the audience already going, no, it stands for Minor Extractable Value. Actually, it used to, but now it's Maximum Extractable Value. It also used to be like Blockchain Extractable Value. All joking aside, there's similar terms. You understand what I'm talking about, but I think the correct term now, unless I'm mistaken, is Maximum Extractable Value. And so I really like Charlie Noyes' definition of this, so I'm just going to steal that from him. Thanks, Charlie. So what it is, it's a measure of the profit a miner, validator, sequencer, basically whoever has any authority over transaction ordering can make through their ability to arbitrarily include, exclude, or reorder transactions within the blocks they produce. So keep this in mind as we go through this presentation. To summarize that, it's basically whatever entities, the value an entity can extract through their ability to change the order that in blocks to their advantage, probably, maybe not to their advantage, but I would imagine it normally is the case that it's to their advantage if they're doing it right. So let's continue this. What is maximum extractable value? And so to begin, where the heck does it come from? Is this a blockchain only concept? And the answer is no, absolutely not. This existed in traditional finance long before blockchains existed. The thing is, the traditional finance world has this thing called like a government and like laws to where if someone, say I go to submit a trade and my broker front runs me, that's a very illegal activity, and there are like legal repercussions to that. In the wild west of crypto, not as much of a solution, and so we have to come up with our own ways of dealing with this. And so, like I said before, it's basically the ability to manipulate transaction ordering if you're doing it right in your favor. Maybe right's the wrong term, but I think you understand what I'm saying. And so, like, why do we care? What are the effects of it? And these first 3 points can kind of be lumped together under the first bullet, which is just that it can harm user experience. So those that read Paradigm's article from Daian and Georgios on I feel like what kind of made this whole thing MEV famous, like the Dark Forest article, and to where Dan tried to like white hat and save some users' money from a smart contract that anyone could pull from. And when he tried to extract the funds from that, got front run and someone else took the money. For the person who Dan was trying to help out, that's a negative user experience because that probably should have been your money, but you lost it. And that's a rather unfortunate thing. One of the other results, and we'll get into why this is the case in a little bit, is higher gas prices, which is affects everyone in the network. And it also caused network congestion. And we'll also talk about this in a bit, and these all kind of tie into the user experience thing where like it takes longer for your transactions to be finalized and it costs more to make them happen to begin with. Just overall harms user experience. And then the other side of this is arguably, and probably especially from a researcher's point of view, the more serious one is the security risks associated with MEV. And it can go, there's a range of different risks, but it can go as far as in the extreme, fully like destabilizing consensus and messing with the whole economic incentives that the system provides and just throw everything off. And so we would like to avoid that. And so we, referring to people and researchers in the space, not particularly myself, but we've been working on risk, on how to come up with ways to reduce this risk and properly mitigate MEV. Maybe even prevent, but mitigate, I think, is probably the most appropriate term. And so why haven't we fixed it? Like, okay, hopefully I've convinced you at least a little bit that it's a problem. If I haven't, wait for the future slides. But it turns out that this is a rather hard thing to fix because one, it's hard to define because of like the complexity of Ethereum and other similar blockchains. There's infinite possibilities of like things you can do at the application level. And this means that it's very hard to put like a strict definition on what MEV is and like confine it to that definition, because it's kind of, we can discover new forms of it in the wild as they occur. And so that defining it is hard. And then it seems to be, I think I heard, it might have been Charlie Noyes, sorry if that's wrong, but I heard someone talking about how it's kind of like trying to, maybe like a balloon that doesn't pop and trying to squeeze the air out of it, how you press it and it just like blows a bubble over here, and you press it in a different spot and it goes somewhere else. This is a little bit what MEV is like, where if you try and patch a certain type or mitigate it in some way, it tends to reappear in a different form or take on a different shape that we might not have anticipated. And it's a hard thing to figure out and fix. And so, and there's all sorts of different views on what the proper solutions are to this. I'm not as much going to go into that, more just going to try and walk through what it is and some different solutions and views that exist. But we'll get to that in future slides. So to start, I talked about how MEV is basically the value that an entity can get from their ability to manipulate transaction ordering. So I wanted to define what that can actually look like. And I really like this paper from like the How Dark is the Forest paper from Imperial College in London. They did some, I like this taxonomy in particular, so shout out to them. And so these are kind of the different types of MEV extraction that we've been able to define and look for in blockchains. And so the first one being destructive front running, which what this means, and there's all of these are highlighted in the visual on the right, but what destructive front running means that you place a transaction before the victim transaction. Like if you're an adversary, you place your transaction before the victim transaction, and you do not care what happens to the victim transaction. Like if it fails, doesn't matter. The Dark Forest example would be a case of this, where when they took the funds from the smart contract and Dan's call failed because there was no more funds in it, that's an example of destructive front running, because they just do not care what happens after their transaction. So then there's another type of front running called tolerating front running, in which the adversary does care what happens to the transaction that they are front running, the victim transaction. In one situation that this could be the case that some people might be familiar with is a sandwich attack, which is where you strategically place transactions both before and after the victim transaction to take advantage of some different things. For example, like slippage. And you can strategically place your transactions around the victim transaction to extract value. So the first half of a sandwich attack would be tolerating front running, because the sandwich attack doesn't work if the victim transaction does not execute. So then that brings us to the second half of a sandwich attack. This could also be something along like trying to backrunning, like Oracle price update would be another example of backrunning, but which is where you strategically place your transaction behind the victim transaction to attempt to extract value in whatever way you happen to be attempting. And then the other one would be clogging, which is basically you submit your transaction and spam the network to prevent other transactions from being included. And this could happen in things like smart contract based betting or like auctions. You can see where if you're trying to win an auction, you place your bid and spam the network so nobody else can bid and you win the auction. That would be an example of clogging. Okay, so GPAs, gas price auctions. I imagine some people, maybe most people, I don't know, but I imagine some people have heard of these. And so we were talking about gas prices and network congestion, and this is one of the big reasons that this was happening. I think less so now than it used to be on it, in Ethereum specifically. But so what a gas price auction is when multiple trading bots, they try and outbid each other to front run each other. So this is I really like this visualization from the Flash Boys 2.0 paper. And what this is just two bots, and imagine they're competing for a liquidation event or like an arbitrage opportunity, whatever it may be. Both these bots want to capture MEV from this, and so they're competing against each other. But this doesn't take the place, this competition is not like bot A submits one transaction, bot B submits the other, and whoever wins wins. No, this is like a flood the network with transactions to where you start out with a lower gas fee, whatever low may be in this context. Or I guess you can just look at the graph for that. But and they don't know what transaction is included until the block is produced, right? And so you see that the winning transaction in green here, way more transactions were sent after the winning transaction because they had no way of knowing. So they just continually send transactions with higher and higher prices in the hopes that one of their transactions will be included as the winner in the block. And as you can imagine, when I talk about network congestion, this is why this happens, because this is just a two-bot example for one situation. And you can see there's way more transactions being sent that are actually needed, or I guess it depends on how you define needed, but there's excess transactions being used in this case, and that congest the network. And it's also, each of these has a higher, like you can see the curve go up that correlates to the gas bid that they're offering. And so that also drives up gas prices in the network. So now we're going to go back to the paper I was referring to earlier with Quinn et al. Talking about the generalized front-running bot that they developed. And so they analyzed every block from December 2018 to November 2020, looking for replay opportunities, which is basically seeing, it's kind of the destructive front-running that we talked about earlier, to where you substitute you take a transaction, you calculate if it's profitable, and front run them and execute it for yourself to where you get the money. And they calculated how much revenue there was to be gained by doing this type of attack. And they measured from late 2018 to November 2020, looking for these opportunities. And so in that time period, they found almost 230,000 profitable transactions that could have been replayed by this bot that they developed, and accumulating an estimated profit of around 51,500 ETH, which, especially at today's prices, is extremely non-trivial. So there's a lot of value to be made there. And this is only replay transactions with destructive front running. This is not even talking about like sandwiches and like other different strategies for front running. This is simply replay transactions. Yeah, so I hope this gives you a little bit of a sense of how much value is out there. And so what are the security implications of this? I alluded to this earlier. And there's kind of a lot going on in this sense. One of the initial things is, and probably the less severe of, or I wouldn't even call it severe, but something I think is worth mentioning anyway, is selfish mining, which is just the idea that rational miners driven by economic incentives are incentivized to prioritize the transactions with the highest number that make them the most money. So they will include whatever transactions in a block that are most profitable to them. I think historically that's mostly been represented by like gas fees. But as MEV becomes more prevalent, it's a risk that could shift. Yeah. And so then another thing that could happen is undercutting. And so this is kind of a type of short-term reorg, maybe, to where a miner can fork a high fee block and then hold back some of the fees in an attempt to get other miners to mine off of it, because if they're economically incentivized and rational, then they're going to mine off the block that, like, not necessarily on, there's not necessarily an honesty assumption here. It's more what's most valuable to the miner at that given point in time. And so if you offer them a block with a ton of fees that you forked, you're trying to get people to build off of your block as opposed to maybe the canonical head of the chain. And so this can cause short-term reorgs, which just destabilizes the network to some degree. And so MEV, as I've alluded to, is something that can incentivize chain reorgs, short-term, like we talked about. But then also like the kind of the big risk associated with MEV is time bandit attacks, which is, I've included this nice little allusion to the movie for those that are familiar, but this is a long-term reorg. Yeah, it is basically just a long-term reorg in an attempt to extract value from previous blocks. And so I want to offer some statistics on, like, so I think the initial question would be like, well, why would people do that? And so some statistics on like the amount of value that can be gained. It is available in MEV. So from December 1st, 2018 to August 5th, 2021, at least 2,400 blocks exposed MEV of over 4 times the block reward, including fees, which is already, like, think about that. There's 4 times more MEV available for extraction from miners in these blocks than there is block rewards and fees. So there's already more money to be made. And the highest of the blocks monitored with the most MEV in this time frame had over 8,400 Ethereum available for extraction, which is over 616 times the block reward, which is a ton. So if you're a miner, you can be earning just the block reward, which is like still not bad. But then if you can make, I mean, even 4 times is a solid amount, but let alone over 600 times, all of a sudden, if you saw that old block sitting blocks in the past, there's an it literally gives you an incentive to try and reorg the chain because of how much value is stored and it's just waiting to be extracted from that block. And so with that specific highest block that I referred to, that there was enough MEV there to incentivize a miner with only 0.1% of the mining power to fork the network, which is just a crazy thing. And as Ethereum prices go up or whatever other token prices go up, this is not a problem that goes away. And this is what I'm alluding to here in the next bullet point, that MEV is not bound. Like it increases over time, which makes it all the more scary because it's not just gonna like work itself out and go away. The more the problem persists and builds upon itself over time, which just makes it all the more scary. And so I included this little piece of data from the Flashbots Explorer page. And so the total extracted MEV since January 1st, 2020 is over $750 million. So there's a lot. So when we talk about security implications and why this is a big deal, it's like, yeah, it's nice to throw around terms like front running and stuff, but when you think about the amount of money sitting there waiting to be claimed by miners or front running bots or whatever, it's an extremely non-trivial number. And at least to me, proves that this is something that we have to take seriously. Not just Ethereum, just the blockchain industry in general. This is something we need to be considerate of. And I've been stoked to see that that seems to be the case over the years. As more people have become aware that this is a problem, there's all sorts of amazing research going into it and different products that come out. And it's something that people seem to care about, which is really cool. And like I said before, this is not easy to fix. There's like the balloon analogy that I talked about. It's just it's not there's not a button to just turn off MEV and eliminate it. And it's actually a little bit of a point of contention as to whether MEV can be eliminated at all. Some people are of the frame of mind that MEV is something that cannot be 100% removed from a system. So we need to come up with ways to like reduce its risk, mitigate it, and make it as democratic as possible. And there's also the other side to where like we think that it is something that can be removed and try and come up with ways to do that. So there's different views on how to approach the MEV problem, but there seems to be consensus that there is a problem, even if we don't all agree on the proper solution. A lot of people seem to think that it is an issue, which is, as someone that happens to be what I think. So it's cool to see that other people think that as well. So now I want to walk you through, as we tour through this dark forest, some current solutions, thoughts, mitigations that exist in this space. Because they all kind of have their own different take and flavor, and so it's interesting to go over them. This is not an exhaustive list. These are just the ones that I had initially thought of. So the first one I listed is do nothing. I don't know how popular of a view this is, but I have certainly heard this before. I don't mean to paraphrase the people that have this view, but my understanding is that it's because like in a fully decentralized system, like we shouldn't, like that this is just a property that exists, and trying to mitigate it is like undemocratic or like centralized, whatever it is, and so we should do nothing. Yeah, that's a viewpoint. I, as someone that has like studied this, that's not my particular viewpoint. I think it's probably something we should do stuff about in the best way possible, but it's a viewpoint that's out there. And I should probably say that my views don't represent like the company, or I don't know if that's relevant, but I'm speaking for myself here. So don't get mad at me, not ChainSafe. So then there's another kind of take on preventing it, which is kind of more at the application level, or it just is more at the application level. One, this can be a smart contract design, and like how being conscious of MEV as you're building your smart contracts could be one way of mitigating it. And so another application layer, a solution is using commit reveal schemes. An example of this would be submarine sentencing. For people that don't know what that is, I definitely recommend. That's outside the scope of this presentation to get into, but it's a cool project, and I definitely recommend checking it out. So then there's another kind of take on it, which I think has some positive and, like, again, my own views, some positive and some negative aspects to it, which is avoiding the mempool in its entirety and sending it to, like, say, broadcasting your transaction to a miner that you trust, as opposed to letting it go to be torn to shreds in the mempool. I think this could have value at maybe at an individual scale, or like just a very small scale. But if all the major exchanges started only sending transactions to their own miners or miners that they trust, this just centralizes the block production in the system and hand ordering, like they still have the power to order, and it's just extra trust assumption that they don't. And so I don't necessarily view this as a long-term solution, though maybe it's an effective short-term one. Yeah. So then another solution that I think of happens more at the network layer is the fair sequencing service from Chainlink. And this is where transactions are sent to this fair sequencing service, the Oracle network, and where they agree on the order and then send it back to the blockchain to be included in a block. This takes away the power from just one individual having like, whoever's like the block producer for that block having just like God mode level power. And you at least have to come to consensus among a group of peers on what the ordering of that block should be. And it's a whole like area of research on how to define what fair means in this case. I've talked about that MEV is like by definition like hard to define. And so coming up with what fair actually means isn't trivial, and I would claim will be imperfect, but that doesn't mean that it's not like better or even lots better than not attempting it. So I think this is a really cool service, and definitely recommend checking it out for those that haven't yet. And so then the last one I'm going to talk about, which I imagine a lot of people are familiar with here, is flashbots. And so what this is rather than letting a miner who, like I talked about, the God mode power that the current block producer has in ordering transactions, rather than doing that, you auction off the right to order transactions. And so in that sense, there's value being returned to the system. And there's also different views on this, and if like this is an ideal solution or not. But one, it makes the block producers pay something to have the ability to front run and extract MEV. So and depending on the system, can return that to the users. Is it to the right users? It depends on the implementation, but that's the basic premise of how that works. And the other, maybe depending on who you ask, advantage or disadvantages, but I would say I view this as a good thing, is that it centralizes MEV extraction, but it centralizes it outside of the consensus layer. So if like now the front running and the MEV extraction now happens on, in this case, like the Flashbots network, as opposed to happening like during consensus at like the protocol level of the blockchain itself, it kind of centralizes it and attempts at least to democratize it on the side so as not to interfere with consensus. And so I think there's definitely value added from that, particularly when we're talking about consensus stability. So yeah, and if you haven't heard of Flashbots, like definitely go check them out. They do awesome stuff. Shout out Flashbots. Yeah, these are my resources. I'll link them in the description as well for those curious. All awesome stuff, and definitely not exhaustive. There's all sorts of amazing literature, and in this rather new area of research. But yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised at the growing number of papers and articles and stuff that are out there. So it's really cool to see, and there's just some awesome people in the space doing work. So shout out to all you people in the MEV space doing research or developing applications. It's amazing work. And I would not be a true chain safer if I didn't say that we are hiring. Come join us. We have all sorts of different projects. You can hang out with me. I'm like halfway cool, I think. Maybe not, I don't know. But we're hiring. We have a bunch of cool projects going on. I love it. I think you will too. So if you're looking for a job in the space or want to explore a new one, definitely come check out ChainSafe. I think it will be well worth your time. Yeah, if you want to keep in touch, these are my socials. Like I said, yeah, I'm on Twitter. email is a good way to reach out to me. And like I said before, I'm on the Gossamer team here at ChainSafe. So yeah, we always we love contributors. So if you're interested in Polkadot or implementing the Polkadot host or like Golang or I don't know, just looking for a new project, like come check us out and contribute. We'd love to have you. Yeah, thank you so much for coming to my presentation. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.